Hello everyone, welcome to the lecture 29 of week 6 and the title of today's lecture is Introducing Semantics. So, I hope you remembered that we have been talking about semantics in different ways for some other lectures, but today what we will do is initially we will briefly talk about what do we exactly do in semantics. Then I will introduce you to the idea of the principles of compositionality. Then we will talk about interpretation. We did talk about interpretation in the last class as well, but we will talk about something in relation to semantics. Then we will talk about the conversational implicature and we will also talk about reference and sense. Along with that, let me tell you, in today's class we will go back to certain ideas which we have already discussed while doing syntax. So, those will be revisited from a semantics lens and that will be useful for us. So, if you ask this question what is semantics, by now you know that in semantics we study the meaning component of human language, right. So, we already talked about the concept of meaning in various ways, but if you specify the domain of semantics, you can say that we talk about the nature of meaning, we talk about the properties of the conceptual system underlying meaning. I hope it is ringing a bell, right, the conceptual system underlying meaning, and also how syntactic structures contribute to the interpretation of meaning. Role of non-grammatical factors in understanding of utterances is another issue that is also discussed in semantics. So, the first thing that I will do is I will introduce you to this idea of the principle of compositionality. For some of you this is a known idea. So, when I am using the term called compositionality, I am sure that you are trying to think about composition of something, right. So, the meaning of a sentence is determined by the meaning of its component parts. So, now you know what are the components of a sentence because you have learnt about it in syntax, and as I told you we will be revisiting certain concepts. So, when we consider the meaning of different component parts and also the manner in which they are arranged in the syntactic structure, so we do talk about the meaning of the sentence. So, in order to talk about the meaning of a sentence, we need to talk about the meaning of different components separately. So, this is something which is very important, and this is something that we also refer to as compositionality, meaning is basically compositional in nature. So, let us see what do we mean by constructional meaning. So, we are saying here that structural pattern can have a meaning of their own independent of the component parts. So, while talking about compositionality, it is important for us to remember that when we talk about meaning of different components, it can be slightly different, the meaning can be slightly different when we are talking about the entire sentence, for example. So, here is an example of a caused motion construction. What is this? So, if you think about the form, maybe you have NP, V, NP and PP, and let us read the second part, meaning. So, we can say X causes Y to go somewhere. To go somewhere is the PP, causes is basically negated by the verb, and X and Y are both NPs. Let us see the sentence as well. Neeta moved the car into the garage. So, Neeta and the car are two NPs, you can easily understand. Moved is something which is causing something, and into the garage is the prepositional phrase, as we can see. Now, if we pay attention to the ditransitive construction, here you have NP, V, NP, NP. For example, Neeta baked a cake for Sita, then I have a question for you at this point. So, Neeta is one NP, then a cake is another NP, and Sita is another NP. So, we are actually not saying PP, but there is an NP inside the PP, right. But what about baking? A person causing another person to have something. Can you say that the verb bake is actually causing another person to have something? So, I am asking you to think about the nature of the verb bake here, whether it is actually conveying some meaning related to cause or it is something else. So, we are saying here that sentence meaning comes from the structure itself. So, we do have meanings of the separate components, but the sentence meaning can come from the structure itself. This is another important point for us. I told you that we will be coming back to certain concepts that we have discussed previously. Structural ambiguity is something that you already know, right. You remember the examples where we had figured out how the syntactic structures are different for one single sentence, and we did talk about meaning, if you remember. So, we are coming back to meaning component again, but we have to consider the syntactic structure again, because it is very important. So, when you are saying Nita saw the people with binoculars, you can understand, if you read it carefully, there are two different structures of the same sentence, and the two different structures are associated with different meanings, right. So, in the first sentence, you can say that the people with the binoculars, the entire thing is sitting inside one NP, where you basically you are saying that the people were carrying the binoculars, right. And in the second sentence, saw the people with binoculars. So, we are not putting with binoculars inside the NP like the previous example. Here PP is sitting outside the NP with the VP. Here we are assuming that Nita has the binoculars. Nita saw the people with the help of her binoculars, right. So, we can understand that the syntactic structures are different and the meanings are also different. So, while talking about structural ambiguities, we can consider both syntactic and semantic factors. So, now if you can go back to the lectures of syntax where we discussed ambiguities, you can pay attention again and figure out the meaning component. So, we are saying here that the manner in which the words are grouped together in syntactic structure reflects the way in which their meanings are combined. So, it is super important for our purpose, right, how we are considering the syntactic structure is actually helping us to understand the meaning, right. And we are coming back to another topic that we have discussed previously, but we will discuss it from a meaning point of view now. So, thematic roles, right, you do remember thematic roles, I am sure. We talked about thematic roles as a part of theta theory in the government and binding syntax. So, I did tell you that it is a module of GB syntax where we talk about thematic roles. So, when we were talking about thematic roles or theta roles in syntax, our main task was to pay attention to the syntax, but there was a meaning component as well, because you know thematic roles, the entire discussion is related to the meaning component. You cannot have a discussion of thematic roles by considering only the syntactic factors. So, we know that the role that different NPs play in a situation described by the sentence is something which is the thematic roles. So, I hope you also remember the different names of the roles that we discussed previously. Let us read the sentence now. The courier carried the document from Kharagpur to Delhi. Here courier is not a person, right. If you go back to the previous slides and recall the names of different theta roles, or you can simply go through the readings, you can see that these thematic roles have separate definitions, right. They have particular roles to play, and we also said that it is like actors of a script, if you remember. So, here courier is not a person who is moving, right. Courier is not a person who carried some document with hand or a bag and moved from Kharagpur to Delhi. It's something else. The document is the thing that has been carried, and Kharagpur is a place of origin and Delhi is the destination. So, based on these factors, you can say that the NPs have different thematic roles that are related to the meaning. And we know that theta roles or thematic roles are assigned. We did talk about theta assignment, if you recall. And information by theta role assigned by a particular lexical item is recorded in the thematic grid. So, this is something that we are learning now. Okay. And a verb assigns a theme role if it has one to the complement NP. We know that if there is a complement NP with a verb, the verb will assign a theta role. So, we did not talk about the structural aspect of theta assignment. If you are an advanced learner, I am sure you know that there are certain syntactic structures which are associated with the theta assignment, but here we are just talking about the basics. So, we are not talking about them. So, here we are saying that a verb assigns a theme role to the complement NP, and it's basically the theme role that we are indicating, and the verb assigns an agent role if it has one to its subject NP. So, the complement NP will get theme role and the subject NP will get the agent role. So, this is something which is a kind of general idea, but you have to consider the sentence and consider the meaning component of each and every NP before you talk about the particular theta role. And theta roles are received in deep structure, not surface structure. This is something which is very important. So, you recall that while discussing minimalism, we said that the deep structure and surface structure, these ideas are being changed, but when we talked about GB, we did say that there are deep structure and surface structures, and we also said that certain operations will take place in deep structure. So, here you can say that the assignment of theta roles are done in deep structure. It is important for us, and it is also related to LF if you remember. So, we will talk about some more factors for sentence interpretation which are semantic in nature. So, I will introduce you to the idea of presupposition. So, if you read the sentences now, have you stopped swimming regularly, or have you tried swimming regularly? So, when you are using the verb stop, it implies something, right? It implies that there is a belief that on the part of the speaker that the listener has been exercising or swimming regularly. The assumption of a belief implied in a particular word or structure is called a presupposition. So, it is presupposed, the belief, the assumption, it is presupposed that the person tried the exercise of swimming regularly, and then when the person is saying have you stopped swimming regularly, it means that there is something which is already known. Now, let us talk about something called the conversational maxims, which is a new idea for some of you, and for some of you, you already know about it. So, we often draw inferences about what is meant, but not what is actually said, right. So, there is certain kind of information that we convey which is known as conversational implicature, and we will be talking about the ideas of a person called H. Paul Grice, who introduced this idea of cooperative principle associated with the idea of maxims. So, what is this cooperative principle? The cooperative principle says that make your contribution appropriate to the conversation. And there are 4 different types of maxims which are important for us to know. The first one is the maxim of relevance. it means be relevant. The second is the maxim of quality. So, we can say that try to make your contribution one that is true, do not say things which are false or you lack adequate evidence. The third one is the maxim of quantity. It means do not make your contribution more or less informative than required. And then finally, the maxim of manner, which says avoid ambiguity and obscurity, be brief and orderly. So, these conversational maxims are important parts of semantics, and these can be useful for us in future as well. I will tell you while talking about something else in future. We will come back to maxims. Now, I will talk about 3 particular challenges that people always face while doing semantics. So, the first problem that I am mentioning is the problem of circularity. What is that? So, if you think about the definition of word meanings, you are defining word meanings in terms of words only. So, word meanings are given in words, and this is a circular process, it can never end. You are defining something with a word, then defining it again and defining it again. So, it is a problem of circularity that we often face in semantics. So, how to deal with that? So, we can design a semantic meta language. What do we mean by meta language? Using language to talk about language. So, this is meta language. So, we can design a semantic meta language to describe semantic units and rules of all languages. So, this can help us partially to deal with the idea of the problem of circularity. The second problem is how do we make sure that our definition of a word's meanings are exact? What is the difference between the linguistic knowledge and encyclopedic knowledge? What do we mean by encyclopedic knowledge? The knowledge of the world. There is some knowledge of the world and there is some knowledge which is the linguistic knowledge. So, how to deal with these two, the link between these two? There are of course some more concepts. If you are interested in semantics, you can go through some more theories which are directly talking about the link of encyclopedic knowledge and linguistic knowledge, but here our job is to figure out certain problem areas. So, we can say that meta language can also help in order to talk about the relation between linguistic knowledge and encyclopedic language. And the third one is, the third problem area is, if we can consider the role of a context. What particular utterances mean in a context? So, you can think about considering local contextual elements and also context free elements. So, if you are an advanced learner and you already conduct tests for semantics, then you can understand what I am saying, right. So, we need to take help of certain local contextual elements while we consider some utterances in terms of context. Let us talk about the difference between two very important ideas in semantics called reference and sense. You already learnt about them from some lectures in the beginning part of our course. So, I am coming back to reference and sense now in terms of semantics. So, the relationship by which language hooks onto the world is usually called reference. So, we are coming back to the encyclopedic knowledge component here while talking about reference. So, how language hooks onto the world is something new, but I hope you can understand what we are saying, right. So, these semantic links between elements within the vocabulary system is an aspect of their sense or meaning. So, I am giving two example sentences here. That cat looked ferocious. So, when you are saying that cat, you are referring to something, some particular cat, right, which is out there in the world. And when we are saying we have just reached Calcutta, you are basically referring to a particular NP Calcutta, and here you can say that action of picking out or identifying with words is often called referring or denoting. So, there is another concept of denotation which is different from a notion called connotation, but I am not going into the details and the differences between denotation connotation, because our job is to give you a basic and brief idea of the domain of semantics. So, if you are interested in identifying the differences, you can always read on your own. So, I hope you understood what we are referring to as reference and what we are saying when we are using the term denoting. So, one can use the word Calcutta to refer to or denote the city, and the entity referred to, in this case the city, is usually called the referent. This is another technical term which can be useful for you. So, there is this example that you have also learnt before, the morning star and the evening star, if you recall. So, we can say again in relation to the link between sense and reference, that sense is the way in which an expression presents the reference. So, the morning star and evening star both refers to the same planet, but senses are different. This is a classical example that we often cite in order to talk about the differences. Now, let me talk about certain types of references which are useful for us for various reasons. Even for syntactic reasons, these can be useful for you. So, let us learn about the difference between referring and non-referring expressions. So, while doing GB, I told you that we will not be doing certain modules of GB like the binding theory, but if you happen to know binding theory, then you know that we do need the difference between these two for some purpose. So, let us come back to the definition. So, very, if, not, etc., these actually help sentences denote, but they do not themselves denote entities in the world. They are non-referring expressions, and as opposed to it, we can say that nouns are referring expressions. And if I talk about the difference between constant and variable reference, which is another difference which is important for us. So, there are some examples. You can say Pacific Ocean is, it will have a constant reference, it will not change, and pronouns like I, you, she, etc., these will have variable references, right. You can understand what I am saying. And let us also learn about a new term called deixis. We did come across this term while discussing a long list of categories in syntax, if you remember. So, deixis refers to words where the denotational capability needs contextual support. For example, this. Now, let us talk about the difference between utterance, sentence and proposition. We have already learnt about it in syntax, and I told you that we will come back to this while doing semantics. So, we are here. So, utterance, sentence and proposition, if you remember, what are the differences? So, we can consider certain sentences from the point of view of the speaker, where they are abstract elements to be made real by uttering them, or from the hearer's point of view, where they are abstract elements reached filtering out certain kinds of information from utterances. So, utterances are the actual use and sentences are abstract, if you remember these two, and we talked about the fact that proposition captures the meaning part of a sentence, and these three are of course interrelated. It is not that we need the difference between utterance and sentence only for syntax and we need the idea of proposition only for semantics. It is not like that. We need all three for both syntax and semantics. So, here I will talk about something called the contextual information, and I will ask you to think about the contextual information for the following sentences. Okay. So, if you can say that the tigers beat the bulldogs again, the boy is tall, it is so hot in here and everyone has gone home. So, these sentences are having some kind of contextual information, right. So, what kind of contextual informations are there? So, the boy is tall, but maybe you are talking about something else in a context. It is too hot in here, maybe you are again saying it in a context, and everyone has gone home, you are also saying in terms of some context. So, you can create any context of your own. So, coming to the conclusion part of the lecture, let us go back to certain components which we have already discussed in this class. So, we can say that meaning in human language is discussed in semantics. We can say that meaning of the component parts are important for the meaning of a structure. So, we did say in the very beginning part of this lecture that the meanings of the components of sentence can have different meanings, and when we put them together and create a bigger structure, it can have a different, completely different meaning. And we talked about it in terms of compositionality, if you remember. We talked about the idea of presupposition, which is related to certain assumptions or beliefs. So, when you say that A presupposes B, it means that there is some kind of assumption which is there with in the mind of the speaker and the hearer. Then we talked about the difference between reference and sense, and we did say that these are related concepts, and we also discussed different types of references with examples. So, that is all for today's class. I hope you can go back to the syntax lectures for revising certain concepts for today's lecture, and together we will be able to recall all these concepts. So, I will see you all later. Thank you.